My name is Alicia Brown, and I was 37 years old the night my family laughed at my son. We were gathered around my parents' dining table, the same heavy oak table that had absorbed decades of holidays, arguments, and forced smiles. One bulb in the chandelier flickered like it always did, but no one ever bothered to fix it. In my family, broken things were easier to ignore than confront. My son sat at the far end, his feet swinging just a little beneath the chair. He was 13, tall for his age, quiet, observant. The kind of kid who listened first and spoke only when he felt safe enough to be heard. Family dinners didn't offer that safety. Not with my older sister, Melissa, holding court the way she always did. Still, that night he tried. I could see it in the way he sat straighter than usual, barely touched his food, kept glancing at me like he was rehearsing courage. On the drive over, he'd told me he wanted to say something at dinner. Just something small, he'd said. I told him he could say anything he wanted. He waited. Through my mom asking who made the green bean casserole. Through my dad starting one of his endless stories about the neighbor's pool pump. Then there was a pause, just long enough. When I grow up, my son said softly, I want to be a manager. That was it. No drama, no jokes, just honesty. For a moment, the room went quiet. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that stretches too thin. Then Melissa laughed. It was sharp and nasal, the kind of laugh that lands like a slap. She didn't even look at my son, just swirled her wineglass like she was about to deliver something clever. Just don't expect much, she said. Your kid's more mop than manager. She cackled like she'd just said the smartest thing in the room, and then everyone followed. My brother snorted. One cousin asked if he meant managing janitors. Another said, like, at a fast food place? My mom laughed and shook her head. Even my dad smiled down at his plate, the way he always did when he wanted to stay neutral. I watched my son's face change. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He stared straight ahead at the gravy boat, mouth slightly open, like he was trying to decide whether to explain himself or disappear. His shoulders curled inward, slowly, like he was folding himself smaller so the laughter wouldn't hit as hard. The only person who didn't laugh was my grandmother. She didn't blink. She didn't react. She just looked at me, steady and knowing, like she was waiting for something she already expected. I set my fork down, not loudly, just enough. That's interesting, I said, considering I'm the one paying your mortgage every month. The laughter stopped instantly. Melissa froze mid-breath. Her smile didn't vanish right away, but her hand shook as she lowered her wineglass. My mom cleared her throat. My brother suddenly found the table fascinating. My dad spoke up, soft and hurried. Let's just enjoy dinner. I stood. No, I said, let's not pretend that was okay. The room went silent. You could hear a fork scrape against a plate. You don't get to mock a 13-year-old for having a dream, I continued. Especially not when you're living in a house you can't afford, using money that comes from the woman whose child you just humiliated. Melissa said I was being dramatic, that it was a joke, that I always made things bigger than they were. My mom backed her up, saying I was ruining the dinner and shouldn't bring money into it. I didn't care. You don't get to humiliate my child and expect me to sit here and take it, I said. I turned to my son. Grab your coat. He stood so fast his chair scraped loudly across the floor. We left without another word. The drive home was silent. When we got inside, my son went straight to his room and closed the door gently, like he didn't want to cause more trouble just by existing. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, hands shaking with the kind of anger that doesn't scream. It just burns. That night, I got one text from my sister. You're being ridiculous. Grow up. I didn't respond. And as I lay awake, replaying my son's small, proud voice in my head, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before. This wasn't just a bad dinner. It was the moment everything finally cracked. I didn't really sleep that night. I drifted in and out of it. Thin, useless sleep, where anger and memory tangled together until the sky outside shifted from black to gray. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my son's voice again. When I grow up, I want to be a manager. So sure, so proud. And then the laughter. At around 7 in the morning, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not rushed. Just 3 steady taps, like the person on the other side already knew I was awake. When I opened it, my grandmother stood there holding a white cardboard box tied with string and a thermos wrapped in a dish towel. The box smelled like blueberry muffins, from that old bakery near the church she'd been going to for 50 years. She didn't ask to come in. She never did. She stepped past me, set everything down on the kitchen table, the one with the chipped corner my son picked at when he was nervous, and poured tea like she'd done 100 times when I was a kid hiding out at her place after my parents' blow-ups. Everything about it felt familiar, except now I was the parent, and the kid I was trying to protect wasn't me. She sat across from me and didn't waste time. "You were right," she said. That was it. I hadn't asked for reassurance. I hadn't even told her what happened in detail yet, but hearing it, flat, certain, unqualified, made something in my chest loosen that I didn't realize had locked itself shut. "Even against family," she added, "especially then." She took a sip of tea, eyes steady on mine, and then she told me a story I'd never heard before. She was 21, newly married to my grandfather, pregnant and broke. They lived in a one-bedroom apartment with a leaky ceiling, a mattress on the floor, and a borrowed coffee pot. One night, her older brother came over drunk, took one look at her belly and laughed, said something cruel, something about how maybe the kid would have a better chance if it didn't take after either of them. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She slapped him, right across the mouth, told him to leave and not come back until he figured out what kind of man he wanted to be. They didn't speak for 5 years. It wasn't about the insult, she said quietly. It was about how he laughed while doing it, about how small he tried to make me feel in my own home, and how no one else stood up for that child, so I did. When she finished, I saw her differently, not just strong, deliberate, a woman who had drawn lines long before I was born and never apologized for keeping them. Around 9, my son crept out of his room, pajamas, messy hair, eyes still unsure if he was in trouble for something he didn't understand. When he saw her, his shoulders eased just a little. She smiled at him the way only she could. "Do you still want to be a manager?" He glanced at me first, then nodded. She told him about the best manager she'd ever known, the man who ran the corner store in her old neighborhood, knew everyone's name. Let people buy groceries on credit when times were hard. Helped the elderly reach the top shelves. Kept a photo of his mother taped to the register. "If that's not a real job," she said, "then I don't know what is." He sat beside her and ate a muffin without speaking, but his shoulders were straighter. For a moment, I thought we might be okay. Then the phone started ringing. First my mom, then my dad, then a text from my sister. "You've made this so much worse than it had to be." No apology, no mention of my son, just blame. Later that night, while I was folding laundry, my dad left a voicemail. Short, careful. "Melissa can't make the mortgage payment this month. We need to talk." That was it. Not about what happened, not about your grandson, just the money. I didn't call back. I waited. 3 days later, another voicemail. Same words, same tone. On the 4th day, my mom called. I answered. I don't know why. Maybe I hoped. She spoke softly, said she'd been thinking about me, said my son was a sweet boy. Then, like it was part of the same sentence, she slipped it in. "Your sister missed her payment." She reminded me of the arrangement, the one that was supposed to be temporary, 1 or 2 months after the divorce. That had been 18 months ago. Every month, like clockwork, I sent $1,300 to my parents so they could cover Melissa's mortgage and keep the lie alive. She believed Dad had taken on extra work. She never knew it was me. I asked my mom one question. "Did you tell her to apologize?" There was a pause. "We talked to her," she said. "She knows she crossed a line." That wasn't an answer. An hour later, my sister texted. "Sorry for what I said. I was out of line." That was it. Grandma read it later and nodded once. "That apology isn't for you," she said. "It's so they can say she gave one." She was right. But I still opened my banking app. And that decision would cost me more than money. I told myself I was doing it for the kids. That was the lie I used when my thumb hovered over the screen and the numbers blurred together. My niece and nephew hadn't laughed at my son. They hadn't said a word. They were just kids living inside a mess they didn't create. So I transferred the money, $5,000, enough to cover the missed payment, the next one, and a little buffer so my parents wouldn't panic again too soon. No one said thank you. My mom sent a heart emoji. My dad called to say it was handled and that he appreciated me stepping up. My sister said nothing at all. For a few days, the air felt lighter, like the house had exhaled after holding its breath too long. My son did his homework at the kitchen table again. I caught him humming while he brushed his teeth. Small things, but they mattered. Later that week, my dad called again. This time his voice was firmer. He said he'd told Melissa what she said at dinner was unacceptable, that she needed to apologize properly. She didn't like it, he admitted, but she agreed. She called that evening. Her voice was stiff, measured. She said she was sorry she embarrassed me, that she should have kept the joke to herself. She didn't mention my son, didn't mention laughing, didn't mention the word manager at all. I said, okay. She asked if I was still mad. I don't know, I said. Maybe. We hung up. For a brief moment, it almost felt like things might settle. Not healed, just quieter. I let my guard down enough to believe the worst was behind us. 2 weeks later, I drove to my parents' house to drop off some legal papers for my dad. I didn't plan to stay. I left the car running. As I walked towards the back door, I heard voices from the yard. My mom, my dad, Melissa. I was about to call out when I heard my name. I stopped. Melissa was laughing. "I told you," she said. I knew she'd give in eventually. My mom said something I couldn't make out. Then they all laughed again. And then Melissa said it, the thing that snapped something clean in half. "That kid of hers still thinks he's going to run something someday. What a joke." My dad laughed too. I didn't confront them. I didn't cry. I turned around, got back in my car, and drove straight to my grandmother's house. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. "Come in," she said. I told her everything. She listened. Then she said, "Don't fight. Just walk. You already know who they are. You just forgot to stop expecting better." She showed me old letters, a photo of her sister, Rose, a woman who'd leaned on her for years, taken advantage, mocked her son once. "That was the day I stopped," Grandma said, and I never regretted it. Then she handed me a check for $10,000. "This isn't help," she said. "It's permission." The next day, I told my parents I couldn't do it anymore. No anger, no explanations. Just a clean break. My sister didn't call. Weeks passed. Quiet weeks, healing weeks. Until one Saturday morning, I heard my son crying by the front door. The quiet kind. The kind he tried to hide. I found him sitting on the floor by the front door, his back pressed against it, like he was trying to hold the house together with his body. His shoulders were shaking, but he wasn't making a sound. He was clutching his phone so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. When I asked what happened, he didn't speak. He just turned the screen toward me. It was a video in the family group chat. My nieces and nephews stood in front of a kitchen counter, laughing. One of them held up a cheap foil trophy with a piece of paper taped to it. In black marker, it read, "Manager of the Year." They took turns mocking him. "Look, it's you." You manage feelings, not people. Crybaby manager. In the background, I heard my sister's laugh. Not accidental, not off camera. Planned. The messages had been going on for a week. He hadn't told me because he didn't want to make things worse. That hurt more than the video itself. That my child thought protecting me meant staying quiet while he was being humiliated. I sat down on the floor with him and pulled him into my arms. "This isn't your fault," I told him, "not one piece of it." That night, I didn't want revenge. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted it to stop. I called my grandmother. "You tried to leave quietly," she said. "They burned the bridge anyway." Then she told me exactly what to do. "Say no," she said, "and stop explaining." So I wrote a letter, not an email, not a text, a handwritten letter. I told my parents I wasn't angry, that I wasn't punishing anyone, that I was done paying, done attending holidays where my son was laughed at, done pretending cruelty was humor. I ended it with one sentence. "I love you, but I don't trust you." I dropped the letter off and didn't wait for a response. My mom called. I didn't answer. My sister texted, "Wow." Then, nothing. The silence felt strange at first. Then I realized I didn't miss the chaos. My son slept better. He talked more. He stopped asking about family dinners. Weeks later, I ran into my dad at the grocery store. He said they knew they'd handled things badly. He handed me a letter from my sister. It wasn't an apology. Just excuses. I folded it and put it away. Not to reread, but to remind myself I hadn't imagined any of it. My mom later left a voicemail saying family mattered more than misunderstandings. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. I didn't slam the door. I locked it. Now our life is quieter, smaller, better. My son still wants to be a manager. He still plans and organizes and dreams, but now he smiles when he talks about it. No fear, no shame. And when I look back on everything we walked through, I don't feel regret. I feel peace.